Hello and welcome everybody to today's webinar hosted by ECIS. ECIS is the Educational Collaborative of International Schools, established for 55 years as a not-for-profit organisation. We have over 500 members in 78 countries. My name is Georgie McIntyre and I'm the Chief Learning Officer at ECIS, and it's my pleasure to introduce today's webinar. We will be sharing a recording of today's webinar, and there will be an opportunity at the end to ask questions via the chat box, the Q&A box, or if you'd like to post your questions in the Zoom webinar chat box, selecting all panelists and attendees. As part of the ECS community, we have a number of key partners who provide support and services to our schools community. ECS are extremely proud to partner with TextHelp. Please let me introduce our expert today. Patrick is the Resident Education Technology Strategist at TextHelp. He's a passionate educator and is an accomplished international speaker, blogger, panellist and contributor across a wide range of media. Whilst focusing on how technology can make a real and meaningful impact on teaching and learning for all, Patrick has a particular interest in inclusion and equality and equity for all. An Apple Education Mentor and a Google Certified Educator, Patrick received the UK Digital Leader 100 Award in 2016. He's worked with thousands of schools on areas such as literacy, maths and inclusion. Please join me in welcoming and handing over to Patrick from TextHelp. Welcome, Patrick.
Thank you very much, Georgie. I think you definitely, I'll have to shorten that bio. You're really eating into my presentation time with that one. So thank you very much. That was very welcoming. And thank you to all of you for joining us today. As we all know, it's been a difficult few months. Some of you will already be back to school. Some of you will be planning to go back to school. Others will be planning for remote and blended learning in at the very least the first term. So whatever you're doing and whatever point you're at in terms of looking forward to teaching this year, I hope there's something in this webinar for you. So this webinar kind of comes in two parts today. I'm going to jump in and do a few slides just at the outset. We are, of course, going to be focusing on blended learning today, and we're going to be looking at some key tips and takeaways that you can take and readily use over 5 different products that I'm going to share with you. So we want to give you the theory behind it just at the outset, give you a brief overview, but really what I want to get down to is how we can actually use these and how do they relate, these tips and these tools relate to effective practice. We want to bring as much value as possible. For people that have been in my webinars before, they will know that I talk way too much as an Irishman. And the advantage for you guys today is the 5 tips may well turn into 10 tips, but I do promise that we'll finish in due time and I'll get as many of these valuable tips into the process as we absolutely can. We'll have time for some questions and answers at the end. Do post them in the question or chat window in Zoom, and then our colleagues and friends from ECIS are going to share that and hopefully we can get you some answers. I'll also have some follow-up pieces for you today, which I'll put just on the last couple of slides as we go, so you can get access to some quality resources and get access to the products as we go through. So as Georgie said, I won't go through and redo my bio. All I do want to say at this stage, I suppose, is 2 things. Number one, that my focus is as a strategist, and that really just means that my focus is and always will be on teaching and learning. So I don't care what the product is. I don't care if it's a Texthelp product or another technology tool. My focus is on ensuring that you guys as educators and practitioners can get the very best, most effective practice from that particular tool. As it happens today, we'll be focusing exclusively on Texthelp tools, but we always roll in different tools throughout our own and our partner webinars with our friends at ECIS. So that's number one. Number 2 is on screen, you'll see my pre-lockdown Bitmoji, which at the time my 15-year-old daughter created. I'm really hoping when she decides to recreate my post-COVID lockdown Bitmoji that it looks a little bit thinner and has a much better haircut than that one you see on screen. So we'll unveil that in a couple of months, hopefully. If you want to reach me after today, you can get me at edtech@texthelp.com or on Twitter at @th_PatrickM. So let's get in past the introductions into really what we want to talk about and frame a little bit better the few tips and tricks and access to the products that we're going to show you today. And there's kind of 4 areas that I'd like to focus on, and we'll drill down into each of these as we progress through today's webinar. And the first is the use of PDFs when it comes to remote and blended learning, and how can we make those accessible for all students, but also how can we make them actionable? So what can we do with our PDFs to make sure that students can perhaps use those to fill in worksheets, to make notes, to use them as part of research and study? So accessible and actionable PDFs. The next thing is digital maths. So maths has long been the poor cousin, or the middle child, as it were, of digital technology. Why? Because students, first of all, of course, very much used to a pen and paper approach. And when we started to move quite rapidly to remote learning and using more digital devices, we didn't really have the tools to make maths digital as easy as we'd like. So I'm going to show you some ways that we can fit into remote learning and some tips and tricks that you can use there that can really help accelerate maths within a digital learning environment. The next thing is writing assessment and tracking. On digital devices, we're obviously getting pupils and students to write more rather than handwrite. So we are using more and more things like Google Docs and Microsoft Word. So how can we provide, in the context of remote learning, teachers with a very straightforward way to provide assessment and track that progress of writing as we go? So we're going to show you a very special tool there. And I'll name some of these as we go through today. And last, and certainly not least, is reading, writing, and comprehension. So we need to provide accessibility, but also we may well need to provide essential supports. But what you're going to see from the tips and tricks today is that these essential supports could be turned around by a teacher to really support some other areas like effective feedback and effective assessment and progress identification. So these are the areas that really we're going to compass and focus on. Now, the title of today's webinar is, of course, in and around blended and remote learning. But I think the important thing that we've all learned is that our usage through this, despite all the challenges, has obviously increased our usage on digital devices in general. And I'm sure that as things progress and we start to settle into classroom environments, we may well have a hybrid mix of some of our pupils in class and some of our pupils at home. But certainly the use of digital devices will no doubt increase. So as we go through our hands-on piece today, we'll be able to see exactly how the very same strategies that we can use for remote learning and blended learning, we can use in, say, a one-to-one classroom or a many-to-one or one-to-many classroom in terms of digital devices. So this is about using digital technology effectively to drive pedagogy. Irrespective of whether it's in class or at home, we're going to show you the tools that can be used effectively to support a very smooth transition between those two. Some of us will start to teach this year. Some of us, unfortunately, may well have to move to remote learning, and others will be the reverse of that. And so the transition piece of ensuring that we use the same tools and we can use the same strategies at home and in school are very important. So don't think just because we've titled this blended learning today that we can't use these as effective classroom strategies. So to touch upon the products, so we talked about the areas that we like to work in, so accessible and actionable PDFs, digital maths, those areas. So I'm going to show you 5 different products here, and this is not a hard sell for those of you on the webinar today. This is really to show you and illustrate how you can get access to these products and then how you can use them effectively in strategies. So I just want to give you a run through of the names, so when we get to them, you can identify with those. So the first one is Read and Write, the purple one right at the top. That'll give us accessibility for everything. It'll give us opportunities for feedback. That's our literacy product, core literacy product, and that will help us in many ways across many subjects. The next one, the big Q there, is WriteQ, and WriteQ is going to help automate the process of writing assessment and provide great feedback for students. So that's WriteQ. That helps us with writing assessment. The next one is Texthelp PDF Reader. So PDF Reader in red there, and that's going to give us amazing ways to very quickly mark on PDFs, but also to produce digital resources super, super fast, and to amend and add to those and enrich them for activities. The next one, the green one there, is Fluency Tutor. And that's going to help us help students practice reading aloud. So when we're in an environment of remote learning, we're going to be able to send a passage to a student, and we're going to encourage them to read it out loud and be able to send it directly back to you as the teacher. So that's Fluency Tutor. And last on the list there, and for me on a personal level, the most exciting thing on the list, as I hope you'll see, is Equatio. Equatio in blue there. That's going to give us a way to make maths digital. It's also going to give us a way to create a brilliant workflow so we can send maths challenges directly out to our students, have them complete them, send them back, all in a very smooth, easy to use flow within a blended learning environment. And there's lots of ways we can use this in things like Google Forms. So that's Read and Write, WriteQ, Texthelp PDF Reader, Fluency Tutor, and Equatio. So what I'm going to do as we go through is I'm going to pick out each of these. I'm going to step through live demos of just a couple of features of each of these. And what I would say is that we're not trying to train you guys today on each of these tools. That's far beyond the 45, 50 minutes that we have. What we really want to do is give you a very clear insight as to how you can drop these in and use these really well for blended learning. And if you want access to training on these, we can arrange that after today. And I'll give you some links that we can share at the end when we share how to access the products themselves. So those are the 5 core tools, and we're going to jump into a couple of really key examples in each of those. And as I mentioned, and just keep those 5 on the screen, you're going to see me through the demo today utilize Google Classroom at certain points. So each of those 5 tools are fully integrated with Google Classroom. Now, we're not trying to get techie, we're not trying to get nerdy on this, but the important thing is that when you take tools like this and you make sure that there's a Google Classroom button within them or an integration, it means that workflow and ease of use for students that are using Google Classroom is pretty well advanced. So we know that students know how to access the tools, they know how to return an assignment, they know where to get their feedback. So we integrate all of these into Google Classroom. And if you're not using Google Classroom, that's fine too. You simply won't use the Google Classroom button. But all of the tools here are available across multiple platforms. So whether you just use the Chrome browser, or you use G Suite, or you're a Microsoft school using Teams and Docs and PowerPoint, whether you use Chromebooks or whether you use iPads, these strategies and tips and tricks can plug right into those. At Texthelp, we don't really care about what you use. We care far more about how you use it and to ensure that you use it effectively. So these tools available across platforms. So before we jump into hands-on, let's just think about just in 2 slides, how can we sum up the challenges that we face? And we're not deliberately going here in terms of health and well-being and the things that we really know are challenges within the turbulent times we've had and moving forward. But from technology and the tools that we are starting to put in place to support blended learning, what are the challenges that we see? And there are, in my mind, 6, and I absolutely share more on the Q&A there if you see more, but specifically in related to technology usage and to drive and underpin teaching and learning. For me, the challenges that I've seen teachers face are creation of resources. How do we create these new digital resources fast? Or how do we amend resources that we have had previously to make them more suitable for this blended learning world? Assignment is another one. So how do we make it easy to get these resources out to our students? Lots of you may well be incorporating Google Classroom, but there are many different ways that we can assign pieces out. We're going to show you some fast ways to do that. And then for me, and this is an interesting one of the challenges has been completion. So when I say completion, we set an assignment in blended learning and we pass this assignment out and we ask the students to complete it and send it back. But what are we asking them to send back? If we send them a PDF sheet, are we asking them to print it, to fill it in, to scan it, to photograph it, return the photograph? Are we giving them the tools that they can simply do that online? Are we giving them the opportunity to upload content from their mobiles? How can we help them with this completion bit? And then assessment. So is there a fast and efficient way to assess content when we have it returned? How do we provide effective feedback? Are there better ways to do that rather than our traditional pen and paper approach in our straightforward classroom? And lastly for me, and this is very important, and it's a hard balance when we come to technology, but it's how do we increase and encourage motivation in our students? They sometimes, if you're not doing synchronous learning, they will have flexibility in their day. And for those of us who have worked at home, we know that that can be a challenge for a lot of us at the best of times to ensure that we are motivated and on task and work. So with the wide range of assignments we may well be giving out, how can we use tech tools to motivate our students? So these for me plug into 5 different spheres. Okay, so these are the spheres, and then we'll just jump straight into the hands-on demo. Number 1 is, how do we ensure that everything is made accessible for students? Okay, so if we take a piece of a resource or a piece of content, how do we make sure that every student, irrespective of them having an individual need or being an SEND student, how do we make sure every student can access that easily? Okay, that's important, and that's something that in the early days of lockdown, as we rapidly moved to remote and blended learning, we missed out on. So assessment, how do we assess the work? Really critical. Feedback, we've talked about. Motivation, we've talked about. And last on the list there in our 5 areas that we'll look at are parents. And I'm sure you'll agree that the involvement of parents in their child's education throughout the last number of months, as it will be throughout possibly the next academic year, is critical. And when it comes to technology, it gets more complex, because while parents, of course, are very keen by and large to support their students' well-being and support their education, when it comes to technology, they can get lost. So we need to make sure that this technology is easy for parents to understand. And secondly, it's easy for them to understand how and when and why it plugs in to learning. Because as parents, and I'm a parent myself, I have a 16-year-old daughter, as parents, sometimes we can miss the point of why it's valuable and how they actually use it and what benefit they derive from it. So those are the kind of blocks that we're going to move through as we go. So what I'm going to do here now, I am just going to move out of the presentation, okay? So we're going to move out of the presentation, and what we're going to do right now is we're going to jump directly into some demos, okay? So we're going to jump into some demos, and we're going to move those around the screen. So I have lots and lots and lots of lovely tabs open here, and we're going to go through each of those areas in turn. I'll just go back to this slide. Remember our 5 products. I'm going to give you the tips in these products. So it doesn't matter what you teach, it doesn't matter the subject, it doesn't matter the level, we should have something here that can take you through. So the first thing I'm going to have a look at here is just general accessibility that we talked about. And in terms of general accessibility, the one I mentioned earlier is a product called Read and Write. Now, I promise today I'll only show you just a couple of features, and I will stick to that. But if you haven't met Read and Write before, there's a couple of things you need to know about it. First, it's a toolbar, so it works across everything, okay? So it just adds an extra set of buttons for our students to make things more accessible. Let me give you an example of how it does that, okay? And we're not quite in our tips and tricks yet. But if I just click a cursor on a Word document, on a PDF, which we'll see in a second, and a Google Doc, I can very simply click play.
It may seem like the Earth is made up of one big solid rock, but
So now you'll see I get text-to-speech, and that's read out loud, and that gives me the capability to have that content more accessible. As a teacher, I haven't had to do anything. They're just equipped with the tool, and now they have access to have that read out loud. They can have access to that in multiple languages, and they can have access to many, many features that can help them. So if, for example, I take an individual word here, I can also get a dictionary definition, which I can play out loud, or I can get a picture dictionary view of it, so I can get an image of that word as well. So this is really helpful to provide accessibility easy. easily, and that will provide them with tools to help them with reading, with writing, with comprehension, with all sorts of manner of things. It'll also help them with research because we've got digital highlighters, and we'll see how that can be brilliant in PDFs as one of our tips. So that's a very, very quick overview. So I promise to show you 2 features within each of these tools. So feature number 1, or tip number 1 that I'll show you, is this. Students, when remote learning, like to take content and consume content in different ways. So it might be fine to send this document, if we happen to be studying earthquakes, out to every one of our students. It might be even better if we give them read and write, because then it can be more accessible for them. Every piece in this document becomes accessible. But what about a student who may prefer to study on the sofa and listen to this work? What about a student who may find that that's either better for them just because it's the way they prefer to do things, or better for them because they have an individual need that this might help support their learning? Well, tip number 1 is a feature called Audio Note, okay? And what Audio Note allows a student to do is very simply this. I'm just going to go Control and A. I'm going to select everything in that document, so every word is selected. I'm going to go up to my toolbar, and I'm going to press Audio Maker, and guess what happens? Read and write in the background goes away, and it, in just a matter of a few seconds, it converts this directly into a digital audio file. So it converts it into a file that is text-to-speech. So you'll see the screen just went white there, but what you maybe didn't catch is just down the bottom of my window here, I have a MP3 file. So the student has now been able to take the notes that you've given to them, press one button, and turn it into a file that they can listen to on their desktop, on their laptop, on their Chromebook, on their mobile phone. So now they have notes in an alternative format that may well suit them better, either through preference or individual needs. And a double click would just play that out, but that will just be played out with a natural sounding text-to-speech engine. And of course, they could change that in terms of accent, in terms of gender, and they can make it more neutral if they like. They can add an intonation to it as well. But that is the first great feature in terms of blended learning. Give your students the opportunity to convert those notes out. And if, as a teacher, you would prefer to do that, you can take any piece of content, select all or select passages, turn it into an audiobook straight away, and they can listen to it. We find this great for everything from exam prep through to detailed comprehension pieces, through to hard and fast knowledge that we want pupils to consume and understand. A really useful tool. So that's tip number 1. Tip number 2 then, as we go through read and write, is this one. So if I assume this is a comprehension piece, okay, and I'll just move down the comprehension piece. Let's assume for one instance here that students have answered this particular question and have returned it to me as the teacher. Okay, now they may well have used all of these tools here. They may well have used prediction. They may well have used a range of tools that we have to offer them. But what I want to show here is a mechanism for you to give them really good feedback easily. So again, let's take it. Student has sent this back via email or via Google Classroom. I want to provide some feedback to their answers. All I need to do is select the piece that I want to comment on. I go up to the toolbar and I press voice note, and this gives me this little bar up. Okay, and this work in Microsoft Word, it'll work in Google Docs, it'll work on PDFs, it'll work anywhere. All I need to do is press this button. And now I'm going to give some oral feedback to my students. That was a great answer, but you may need to extend that out and explain what each of the layers are in turn for a better result. I'll press the stop button, and then I press the insert button. And what happens here is you're recording your voice up to 60 seconds is now inserted right in their document as a play icon. So when the students reopen this document, whether you send it back or they just open it in something like Google Classroom or Microsoft Teams, simply play the button. And now I'm going to give some oral feedback to my students, and that feedback has been given to them. Think about how personal that makes the remote blended learning environment, because they're hearing your voice, they're hearing your expression, they're hearing how you change and vary through it. So 60 seconds, and we can add as many of these into a document as we want. And we can do that in Google Docs, or we can do it in Microsoft Word as well. So it's a great way to provide feedback. And think about what I did whilst I'm talking a lot here. All I had to do was highlight, press, record, and insert. Okay, so I'm on 3 buttons, and I've automatically put in voice feedback to my students. What more friendly way could we give that to our students? And that's stored within their Google Drive or their OneDrive or within the document. So you don't have to worry about what's going on in the background. We'll just give them the capability to have this feedback there. So that's a very short 2 steps that we can take. So we can turn it into an audiobook, or we can add oral feedback. But I wanted to show you the same toolbar and show you another tip. So I promised to try and give you some value on this. So I'm going to jump into another tip here, okay? So I'm going to open up a web page. This is my favorite web page for demoing. Don't ask me why, but I'm a big fan of space and have been since I was determined to be an astronaut at 3 years of age. Hasn't quite worked out, but let's take this document or this web page that you see. Now, if we were assigning this through Google Classroom or Teams, and we were saying to a student, we want you to read this web page, we want you to understand it, perhaps we want to ask some questions, or we want them to rewrite it or produce a piece on it. So we've just sent them out a link to a web page. Now this is just a regular old BBC web page, nothing fancy about it, but regular old BBC web pages, lots and lots of information down the side, video content, audio content, related pieces. Now, that for many students could be a distraction to the overall task. So what I can do here is I can open the read and write toolbar. Okay, so this is going to be applicable when we're in Google Chrome. The toolbar will open directly on your screen. Okay, and what we want to see here is, where do we just see? And of course, one of our little features has managed to just disappear. I'm going to just quickly turn it on here in 1 second. So read and write gives you the capability here of switching on and off features at a global level, so we can decide what help we want to give students. So in my last demo, I just switched that off. So I now have switched on this feature. So this is what it'll look like as standard when a student opens it. But I have a button there called Simplify Page. All I need to do is press that button once. Okay, so I'm on a web page. I press simplify, and what read and write will do now is it will start to simplify this page. So it will first of all remove the distractions. So that's good. It removes the distractions and it will give us an extra bit of focus. But what it will now allow me to do is it'll allow me at this case to simplify the piece, but retain the content and the point in the piece. So what I've enabled my students to do when I've sent them a piece of work is to effectively select the reading level or the comprehension level that they want to read at, but still retain the meaning of the actual text, okay? So I can reduce that all the way down to a simplistic level, or I can go right the way back up and I can include all of the content that you saw earlier. So that's really useful because students are now in charge of the reading level and they can still complete the assignment based on that. Students can also, when they're at this point, switch on Discover. So for example, let's say this is part of an assignment. We'll go out and we'll find all of the most important pieces in this, and we'll link directly into a short, easy to understand Wikipedia article. So all I need to do here, as I hover over astronauts, I'll click it. So it'll give me an explanation of what an astronaut is and give me a picture reference for that as well. So if you've asked students to do this on an assignment, it's a really wonderful tool to help them explore a web page in much more detail in a better way. But that's not the only thing that it can do, because for students who may require it, we also can do things like change the contrast, okay? So that's brilliant. We can change the contrast. That'll help particular students, but also we can change the font size and the font type. So we can change this. So it now becomes much more accessible, okay? And we can change the spacing if we want. We can change the colors, and we can change this, for example, if we have dyslexic students, we can change this to an open dyslexic font, which is a font specifically designed to support individual students, okay? So I'm gonna go back directly into the document here and made it as small as possible. So I'm going to go right the way back to here. We're going to go back to where we were, and we can, as we progress through our reading level, we can go right the way back to the original content of the page. What has a teacher been asked to do to enable a student there? And the answer is nothing, apart from encourage a student to use the tool, because students now have the independence to use those tools within Read and Write to support and change and amend their reading level, build their comprehension and understanding, and get the help that they really need. It's in the students' hands if we give them access to these tools. So that's our tips in and around Read and Write. So think about on Google Docs or Word, feedback, think about how we can make it into an audiobook and have an alternative format. And then where we're on web pages, the tip there is to look at how we can simplify the content and select the reading level. And that's all available within Read and Write. So I'm now going to go to something slightly different. And I'm going to go to something like the tools that you've looked at, Read and Write. And this is the second of our 5 tools. This is Texthelp PDF Reader. Okay, now PDF Reader will bring those same tools that you just saw to give accessibility to any PDF, but also to give students a little bit more. So let me just, I'm going to stick with my life in space theme. Okay, so we're going to stick to that theme as we go. So I've Googled for it, and there is one from, let's just see if this one works for us. And this is a NASA piece. Okay, so let's just open that. So that's just a PDF I just Googled. Okay, now a couple of really nice things about this. Okay, when you have Read and Write installed, so when you've installed this and your students have it installed, and that can all be done automatically, you then have access to PDF Reader, okay? And all I need to do far more with this rather than just read it is click the little button that's going to come up here, and it's going to open this document in Texthelp PDF Reader. Now, the things that it will give us right here, right now, are the same tools that you've seen before. So if I simply, as a student, want to have this read out loud, I can simply hover over any words that are within here, and I can have that read out loud.
912 National Science Standards. Life Science.
Okay, so I can have that read out loud, so I start to build accessibility. Now, the other thing I could do here is, apart from just simply giving it and letting it be accessible, I could amend it and change it. Why? Because I now have annotation here. So I have the ability to freehand draw and highlight things. But here's a great tool here, which is our push pin tool. So let's say we wanted to start a student. We wanted to say, have a read and answer questions, okay? So I'm giving them some additional instructions here on the PDF, and I'm just going to click that little button. Okay, and now all I need to tell my students is to open the PDF and click on any of the little red pins, and they may well get hyperlinks to other content. They may well get instructions as to how to complete this. But I've now been able to take a PDF which I've just found on Google, and I've been able to enrich it. Okay, so we can open a PDF directly within this and make it accessible. So accessibility is important. Tip number 1 here is it will allow us to share this very easily if we're using Google Classroom. So you'll see the little Google Classroom button comes up. So let's say I just Googled it, okay? Let's say I didn't want to amend this in any way. I just wanted to share it with my students because I feel it's a good resource and it perhaps augments or supplements a particular topic. All I need to do is press my Google Classroom button, okay? My Google Classroom button will pop up. I have Google Classroom sharing now, so I'm able to go right the way here, and I'm going to pick this class, and I'm going to decide I want to very simply just create material because it's just a PDF. I just want to share it with them, and I want to ask them to read it in conjunction with their current topic. So I'm just going to give them an instruction, please read, and I'm going to say post, and in just a couple of clicks there, I have sent that to my Google Class. So Google a PDF, find it, quickly send it with Texthelp PDF Reader in just that one button. This is really important because a lot of the, if you're using Google Classroom, a lot of the extensions are starting to disappear where you can share easily. This allows you to do that. But let's see something slightly different on this. Let me go to, I'm using Google here, but this could be at any drive point. So this is my list of PDF resources that I may well want to use with my students. Okay, so let's see what we could do with this. If I very simply double click on the PDF, in this case in my Google Drive, so here's a resource and an activity in this case I want to share with students. I'm going to open with Read and Write for Google Chrome. So it's going to open that PDF in Texthelp PDF Reader. Okay, now there's some really good tips and tricks here. Remember, if a student opens it, it's now accessible. Okay, they can have it read aloud, they can reduce distractions, they can use it for highlight and study. But if as a teacher I wanted to amend this and enrich it, I could get access to a typewriter tool, okay, which I could say, very sharp and to the point, but read and understand, okay? And now I've had annotation placed on this. Now, if I wanted to highlight any specifics within this, okay, I could very simply draw some pieces out here. And of course, I can change that color as I go. Let's make that into a red and let's do it somewhat differently. Okay, so I can annotate on top of PDFs really simply. I can put shapes on. And again, remember, I can put the push pins. So if I want this push pin, I'll say, visit, we'll go www.earth.com. Okay, so I've now been able to, with just those few tools, enrich a resource either that I've had or I've found on the web. And again, I can go all the way back and I can share this with Classroom directly here. Now, this is great for a teacher, but imagine this in the hands of students because they can now start to do things like this. They can use highlighters. So we can select pieces. So perhaps at this point, what they're actually doing is they want to get access to a particular segment. So let me just switch off my push pin at this point and let me just highlight. Okay, and let me go up to highlighters and I want to highlight that in yellow because I want to group it. So I can go through an entire PDF and I can now create a set of notes based on the research that I've put together. So really powerful tool for me to use. So that's PDF Reader. So number one, open resources and share it easily. Number two, you can amend resources. And within that, of course, see all of those tools that we created there. Let's say you have a comprehension piece. I can, in the hands of students, allow them to very simply answer a question, okay? Because they can use the typewriter piece within this and they can place their answers on a PDF sheet. Think of a PDF worksheet. Think of them using Texthelp PDF Reader with it. You send out a PDF, it's a maths worksheet, it's a science worksheet, it's an English worksheet. Now they have the ability to be able to complete that. That's an actionable PDF. You haven't had to do anything more to the PDF. You've just had to ensure that the students have access to PDF Reader. And if you take one last example of that, I'm in Google Classroom here right now. Doesn't matter where I get the PDF. I'm just using it because of lots of us around the world are using Google Classroom now. But this is a PDF that Karianna sent back to me. So this is my student. She's also on the call here. So she's really a colleague rather than a student. But she sent this piece back. This was a piece of maths work that she did, okay? And I'm now in Google Classroom and I need to mark it. How could I mark it? Think about those tools. I could pick up freehand. I'm going to change that because my favorite marking color is absolutely green. And I could start to mark this with my mouse really, really easily. But remember, what I could also do here is I could put my voice note on here as well and record that oral feedback. I could put the push pin because Karianne hasn't answered this right. You may want to consider. So Karianne, and I put an explanation there. Karianne knows when she gets this piece back, if she clicks this, she's going to get access to the notes that I have left for her, okay? So this gives us access to so many things in so many ways. So we've got marking and completion, actionable PDFs. So lots of things we can do here when we have a really powerful PDF tool. So we're going to move on to the third one, and it starts to go faster from here, I promise. We're going to move into Equatio. So this is the maths piece. Now, we don't have time, as I said, to run you through all of the wonderful things that Equatio can do. So I'm just going to mention a couple of them. I'm going to open the extension and you'll see that it brings up a list of lots of extra buttons that we can use here. So for example, I want a student to to answer a quadratic equation question. I can open the button at the bottom. I can put in my quadratic formula, or I could start to answer it So I can start saying -4, and I can say plus or minus. So I have prediction, and I have a way that I can integrate this into Google Docs or Word or PDF. Press Insert Maths, and what does it do? It puts the maths right into my document. So now I've got an easy way to put maths in there. I've got the ability to add things like graphs. Okay, so I can take a graph and I can say, right, I'm going to plot a single coordinate here, and then it plots it on the graph, and of course I can put it right into my document. So I can have access to that. Not only that, I have the ability to let a student use handwriting or use dictation, take a photograph of a written piece of work, or even start to use shapes. And shapes is done in the sphere of a thing called MathSpace. Okay, so we're not quite at the tips yet. I'm just giving you a quick overview. But in MathSpace, for example, I could very easily draw a right angle triangle. I could very easily start to label up the sides of that triangle just through this little button at the bottom. And so now I have a fast way to create a resource, and it's going to go directly into my document once I press that button. So now I've got a tool that can enable students to do maths and science remotely. And I've also given them some extras. I've given them things like a full scientific calculator right in their device on their window. I've given them the capability now of getting access to the periodic table, which is fully interactive here as well. And I've also given them the capability of a molecular viewer. So for example, if I start to type in something like caffeine here as a regular substance, I can start to explore that easily. The point in Equatio and its value in blended learning is we're giving students the tools they need to express maths digitally, and we're giving them the widest range of tools. But I promised you that we'd look at a couple of specific ways that we could use this, okay? So think about all those tools, and again, this is a whole hour in itself just to go through Equatio, but a student has so many ways to put content into their documents. How could you use it in blended learning aside from the obvious? Okay, so there's two specific ways. Number one, we can use it in Google Forms. Now, if you've used Google Forms and you've tried to put maths content in there, you probably will have done what this first question does on screen, okay? And this first question on screen here is which is greater, a half or a third? And all I've done is 1/2. So it doesn't look much like maths, and it's really only a multiple choice question. So it's not that great for an assessment piece in and around maths. So how could we change that? Well, I can delete that content, and because I have Equatio, the maths tool, I can press my blue button, and instead of trying to figure out what it looks like on a keyboard, I can just type it in the Equatio editor. And now what's going to happen here is that it's going to insert proper accessible maths within a form, okay? So it gives me many ways that I can enrich a form. So let's take one more example here, and we'll go here, all right? And I want to put in, let me see, I'm going to put here, so express as a fraction. I want to do this actually from a visual standpoint. So as a teacher, I can press Insert Maths and MathSpace. And this is just a simple fraction sum. But right here, I can go to Shapes. I'll go to Smart Shapes in this one, and I just want my fraction bar, and I can open my fraction bar, and I can change the number of segments here, and I'm going to add the plus symbol in, okay? So I'm going to add this in, okay? I'm going to insert maths right here, and I'm going to expand that out to here, and then I'm going to, at this stage, put in another symbol. So I'll put in a pizza representation, a pie representation, and here I'll put that all the way up. And now I can insert that, and I can put that directly into my form. So from an assessment perspective, the tip here, think about using Equatio because it'll let you put in correct maths notation, create auto-marking quizzes, put images within here, and it will allow us also really, really wonderfully to grab content from somewhere else. So let's see, we can put our graphs in, but what I'll do is I'll go down to this last question here that I want to change for today. I'm going to go to a PDF. This is just a practice paper PDF, okay? I'm going to open Equatio just to show you how quickly this can be done. And I can grab something from a PDF by drawing a box over it. Maybe this is a question that we just want to put in a Google
Two
form.
lines, line 1.
Access to it. All I have to do is copy it right there. And if I go across to, sorry guys, my tab has slightly disappeared here. So I go across here to my Equatio demo document. Right here, I can pop this in by pressing this button, and I can insert it right away in here. And that question that I just borrowed from a PDF practice paper is now in my Google form. And so we can enrich forms and assessment really easily. What does that look like for a student? It looks a whole lot better than a simple multiple choice with very poor maths content in it. So we have access there to do lots and lots and lots of ways to enrich and improve assessment. So that's tip number 1, use Equatio within Google Forms to enrich assessment and create accurate maths opportunities. So tip number 2 is to use the Equatio dashboard right here. Now the Equatio dashboard, don't think of it as a toolbar. This is just a web page. You can access this on a Chromebook or on any device, even on an iPad. This gives you a way to have a bank of resources that you can share with colleagues so they can reuse them. But importantly, it gives you a workflow to allow students to complete maths work. So I'm going to show you really super quickly how this works. I'm going to create a new assignment, okay? So here we call it a new space. And now we have a space on our screen that we can start to ask a question. So I'm going to say something like, what is the volume of this shape where D equals 10, okay? So just a text question, and I'm going to insert it, okay? So there's my question that I'm sending out to students. I want to supplement that with an image, okay? And what I actually want to do here is I want to put in a simple sphere. And in a sphere, I'm just going to draw it on screen. I'm just going to pick from over 300 different images that relate to maths, physics, and chemistry. And I'm going to be able to pop those in. And now I've created my question. How quick and easy was that? I just need to share it with my students. So I can make a copy for each person, which is what I want to do. I can press continue, and then I will get a link to this math space. Now what's great here is I can paste this into Microsoft Teams. I could send this out on an email or another VLE. Today I'm just going to share it in my Google Classroom. So I'm going to jump into Google Classroom. I'm going to decide that I want to share this out with my maths class, and I want to create it as an assignment so as they complete it. And I'll say, please do. Okay, and right here, I'm actually just, to keep it short and sweet today, I'm going to share it just with me. I'm going to press assign. So what have we done there? We've been able to use Equatio and MathSpace to create content really, really easily and share it with our students. And there's one last tip on this. I can use this kind of like Google Slides right now, and hopefully this will work for me. I can insert an image directly on here. Let's see if it'll find an image in record time. Perhaps it won't. But what I could do right here, right now, is I could insert an image of a worksheet or a picture that I've taken from a practice booklet or some activity, and I could insert it directly in here, and then students have all of this area to complete the worksheet. And they have annotation because they got freehand drawing. So they can freehand draw maths, they can type maths, they can create it, they can insert graphs. So tip number 2 of Equatio is to use Equatio MathSpace, create a workflow, be able to share it with your students, and importantly have students complete it and send it back where you can add additional feedback. And all it takes is one button by the student to send it back and one button for you to add feedback. And if you want to know more about Equatio, we've got some really good Equatio sessions that we can run through. So we've got one last thing that we want to go through here today, and it's a fluency piece before we start to finish up. So I'm going to go into the last product that we're going to have time to cover today, which is a product called Fluency Tutor. This is going to help encourage students to practice reading aloud. This syncs up with Google Classroom, so it will automatically pull in your student names. If you don't have Google Classroom, you can add them all yourself as you go. But what you'll find here is you get access to my students, okay? And I want to see all my students and how they're progressing. So I can see right here, right now, I'll just have to log into this once to keep us going today. I can see all my students. I can see the pieces they've read, how much time they've read, the total passages they've read, what their performance is in terms of their word count per minute. But the tips I want to show you today is, if you just go to fluency.texthelp.com and sign in, you'll be able to share passages with your students. And you can do this in 2 different ways, okay? So the first way is we have equipped it with 500 different comprehension pieces, okay? So a good one for today is a storm. I'm going to decide I want to send that out. I've seen the lexile level. I know how basic that is in terms of its complexity, but I just want to share this out in my class. So I'll click on it. Really super simple piece, and it goes, all these pieces go across multiple levels. You can see here that there's also comprehension questions automatically generated. So I've just selected my piece. I want to include comprehension questions, and all I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to share it with my class, okay? So I'm going to select my class by pressing the Google Classroom button, okay? And I'm going to go all the way down to this class here. Let me just go to this one. That class didn't have anybody actually in it. And once I press this button, it will allow us to share directly out with Google Classroom. It'll automatically send it directly to every student, and it will ask them to complete the exercise. And the student now has access to a web page which allows them to read aloud. So that's one way we can share from the big bank of material that will be there. But we could also just create content, okay? So all of that content is just in English. We could jump in here and we could create content right now just by saying my new piece, okay? And we could copy content in. And we can copy that in whatever language we want to use. So I'm going to take a very quick Spanish piece here, very quickly just for illustration. I'm just going to copy it. I'm going right the way back to this window, and I'm going to paste it directly in here, okay? I can share it with my domain so all my teachers have access to it. But I can also decide the voice that I want to use within that. So I'm going to go all the way down, and I'm going to set that as a Spanish piece, which means that when students get it, they'll have it read out in a natural sounding Spanish voice. They'll get access to dictionaries and picture dictionaries that can help them. And I can share this easily by pressing the Google Classroom button. So that's really, really important. So there's a tip from a teacher perspective. Use Fluency Tutor. Use it to share comprehensions for practice reading aloud that we've given you, or paste any content in you want. But there's a slightly different angle to Fluency Tutor, which I'm going to very quickly jump into, and I'm conscious, guys, of just the time here today. So we'll be finished in around about 3 minutes or so, I promise. And have some time for Q&A. I'm going to go into a student eye view, okay? So let's just for 1 second go into a student eye view. So this is just the student's view, and I'm going to go into the dashboard, okay? And the student can do something slightly different. If the student goes to a web page and the student says, oh, I love this piece about the NASA moon mission, I want to read that piece out loud, all they've got to do at that point is go up, click on the little extension button, and press share with Fluency Tutor. What does that enable us to do? That enables us to generate that as a piece and share that directly with my teacher. Okay, so here's the piece then recreated on your screen. Oh, I'll just need to jump into this. Lots and lots of logins today, guys. You have to do this the first time you use it. There we go. So there is the piece generated. And this is what a student sees whenever they go to read the piece. They're able to record themselves reading aloud. They're able to get help. They're able to change the voice. And really importantly, when they've finished, they're able to press the send button and send that directly back to you as the teacher. We've given them independence. We've helped them with motivation because they're enabled to create content that they're interested in. Okay, so Fluency Tutor is so important. There's a whole hour we devote to Fluency Tutor, and would love you to join us directly on that. So last thing as we finish off here, so that's Fluency Tutor, and there's a couple of really strong tips directly within Fluency Tutor. Okay, so I'm going to go to the last one, and I'm going to show it to you in fastest possible time, just so you're aware of it, because I'd really love you to join us on our literacy webinar coming up on the 15th for this one. But we promise to show you assessments. So this is the last product. This is a thing called RIQ. So this is a piece that a student has sent in to me as a teacher. They've shared it through Google Classroom. Perhaps they've just emailed me the Word document. But this just works as an extension. Watch what happens. If I show the sidebar, as a teacher, I have not had to do anything to mark this work. This tool allows us to automatically mark spelling, punctuation, grammar, tell us the time on task, ascertain the vocabulary age of the piece, and provide a word count. Not only that, but it allows us to apply a rubric directly to this as well. We can import our own rubrics or link with Google Classroom. So it means that we can very quickly mark written work. I'm going to go through and do this in double quick time in terms of grade level. So we can mark that to a rubric that we create or is being provided. And what happens is we get everything summarized. See how quickly it's been. Obviously, I would have had to read the piece to mark it against the rubric, but it's super quick for me to mark the accuracy, the spelling, punctuation, and grammar, and to have a score adjusted for that. Automatically now my student is getting that feedback back. And if you think about the student eye view on that, if I just go down to this very last screen, I'll go down here and I'll look at a similar piece. The student's going to get motivation because as they type, it's going to encourage them to type more. But they can also maximize this as well, and it will give them access to the data. It will give them access to motivation and reward. So watch this. If I go to my achievements, I can see as a student how well my writing is progressing. I get badges and awards for this, and this changes depending on the age level, the vocabulary level of the student. So that's our 5 tools for today. I'm aware, as always, I did warn you, I talk an awful lot. I'm going to finish up with a couple of very quick things here. There's lots of resources available to you to help explore all of these areas on our Wakelet. So we'll share this slide deck after today. You'll have these links. We have access here and now to these 5 tools for you. So I'm going to tell you in 1 second just exactly how to get those. What I want you to do first of all is email row@texthelp.com, and what you'll get is a really detailed document which will run through each of those 5 tools and give you a total of 25 very individual, unique tips. So if you got a flavor today for each of those tools, this document will give you a run through of absolutely everything you can use when it comes to blended learning with those 5 tools in some detail. Just email row@texthelp.com. You'll get help with that. Now, an important thing to start to finish off today is read and write that you saw, the accessibility toolbar on PDFs, on docs, on Word. That is free for teachers. Equatio, the maths tool, we use that in Google Forms and creating a workflow. That is free for teachers as well, entirely free, no strings. If you would like a copy of that today, just email row@texthelp.com and we'll get you a copy of that. That, in conjunction with the 5 ways document that I just shared, will give you everything you need to get started. The other 3 tools, or the other 2 tools, I should say, RIQ and Fluency Tutor, are unfortunately only available on 30-day trials because they're very student-centric. So giving it free to teachers doesn't help anybody a whole lot. But these 2 will help you immensely. They're entirely free. Please do reach out and get them. Just want to say that if you want to look at these tools more in depth, we do have a webinar series September and October. Just go to text.help/LWL in capitals, our Learning Without Limits series, and you'll be able to get that. And equally as important, we have a wonderful webinar coming up on literacy, which will not be quite as rushed and will focus on detailed areas of literacy with our friends at ECIS on the 15th. And if you just watch the ECIS channels, you'll be able to get some links and access to that. Last and definitely not least, please feel free to reach out. I know there's a lot of information in what I've given you today. It was just a flavor for the tips and tricks that you can use our tools in with regard to blended or remote and in-class learning. Reach out, edtech@texthelp.com, or follow me on Twitter. We'll get you anything you need, and that is my promise to you today. So I'll jump very quickly back over to Georgie and Joe there and apologize, as I always have to do, to you guys for running way over time.
Not at all, Patrick. There is just so much information, and I can't actually express how powerful this tool is. We've seen it used in action many, many times. It's enabled a lot of teachers to actually produce some fantastic resources and be really creative and innovative with their teams. So I would highly stress and recommend people actually trialing the tool that you've said you can access as well, Patrick, and also make sure that you, if it's possible, get the free trial as well, which will enable you to
Absolutely.
access anymore. But we don't actually have any more questions at the moment, Patrick, but if anyone wants to drop Patrick a line, I know he'll be more than happy to share those out. As I mentioned at the beginning, we have actually recorded this presentation, so we will be emailing out the link afterwards if you need to stop and catch a breath or go back and follow something through. I think you need to lie down now, Patrick, don't you?
I've got another one in 30 minutes.
Bless you. Bless you. Well, I'm not going to keep you any longer. We're
No.
hugely grateful for your time, and thank you so much.
Thank you to everyone for joining us, and thanks to our friends, as always, ECIS, for facilitating today. Thank you.
No problem. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks.